A simple woman stepped into the luxury jewelry store, wearing worn sandals and a linen dress. The manager glanced at her bag, not her eyes, and called security. They thought she was there to steal. 15 minutes later, a Rolls-Royce pulled up outside. When her husband stepped out, the billionaire whose family name was engraved on the very building, what he did next left the entire staff trembling. The sun glinted off the polished glass of Leora & Sons, a luxury jewelry boutique nestled at the heart of Alden Plaza, a place where diamonds sparkled brighter than kindness, and where the price tags could buy homes. Elena Alden pushed open the double doors, her fingers clutching the small leather strap of a woven handbag she'd owned for nearly a decade. Her sandals were worn at the heel, her linen dress faded by too many washes, and her dark hair, tied in a low bun, held a simple silver pin, the only piece of jewelry she wore. She looked out of place. Even she knew that. But that never used to matter. Elena didn't need designer labels to feel confident. She had spent years teaching literature to underprivileged youth, running book drives and hosting poetry nights in forgotten corners of the city. She was used to being underestimated, but she'd never been treated like this. Not yet. The boutique was cool inside, the air scented with orchids and expensive perfume. Velvet-lined display cases shimmered with rows of necklaces and rings, and behind the counters stood 3 employees, all sleek, polished, and watching her like she'd stepped in to clean the floors. "Can I help you?" came a voice as sharp as the sparkle in the diamonds. The woman's name tag read Monica, her expression already curled into a professional sneer. "Yes," Elena said, her voice gentle but steady. "I'm here to pick up a custom piece. It's ready today. Under Elena Alden." The name landed without recognition. Monica raised an eyebrow, glanced at her colleagues, then at the woman in front of her, as if expecting Elena to vanish from sheer embarrassment. "Custom?" Monica repeated slowly. "Do you have paperwork?" "No," Elena replied patiently. "My husband placed the order last month. It was a special design, sapphire center, hand-etched." She smiled politely. "He said everything would be ready today." Behind her, a wealthy couple whispered. The woman, dripping in Chanel, leaned toward her husband, murmuring, "Why do they even let people like that in here?" Elena heard it. She always did. But she was too used to words sliding off her like water. What stung more was Monica's voice. "I'm afraid we don't have any custom orders under that name, and our pieces typically require full payment in advance. You can't hold items here." She paused, then added with a smile dipped in venom, "Perhaps you meant to visit our outlet location. That's 2 blocks down." "I think you should check again," Elena replied, still soft, still unshaken. "My husband is Victor Alden." The words meant little to Monica, or perhaps she chose to pretend they did. The other clerk, a young man named Sean, glanced up at the name, a flicker of recognition in his eyes, but he said nothing. Monica leaned over the counter, her voice dropping just enough to sound threatening. "Miss Alden, we deal with many high-profile clients. Dropping a name to get access to expensive merchandise is not uncommon, especially from people who—" She glanced down at Elena's sandals. "Don't look the part." Elena drew a breath, firm but still calm. "It's my 10th anniversary. I helped design the piece myself. If you check your records, you'll see it under his name," he called ahead. Monica stood back and folded her arms. "Security!" she called out flatly. Elena blinked, not because she was shocked, but because she knew what was coming. A large man in a suit appeared from the back, bald, silent, and visibly annoyed. "Ma'am," Monica said, her voice now loud enough to draw attention, "we believe this woman may be attempting to gain unauthorized access to high-value inventory. Please escort her outside while we contact the proper authorities." Gasps whispered across the store as 2 more patrons turned, smartphones already in hand. Elena stood motionless. "I'm not leaving," she said, her voice trembling now, not with fear, with disbelief. "My husband owns half this block," Monica scoffed. "And my husband is the Prince of Monaco. Ma'am, if you do not comply, we will be forced to press trespassing charges. This is private property." The security guard moved closer. "Let's go," he said, reaching gently but firmly for her elbow. "This doesn't have to be a scene." But it already was. A scene. An audience. A modern-day trial with no evidence but a worn dress and an accent that wasn't polished enough to belong here. Elena didn't fight. She didn't scream. She let the silence say what her words could not. That she was being humiliated in a place she had supported, financed, and promoted from the shadows for years. That no one here saw her as anything more than a threat. She was escorted through the polished glass doors, the same ones Victor had once said would bear her initials one day, if she wanted them to. Her feet touched the sunlit marble steps outside, and the doors clicked shut behind her. Inside, Monica smirked. "Unbelievable," she said. "What some people will do for attention." Sean looked up again, uncertain now, but it was too late. Outside, Elena stood still, the sounds of the plaza moving around her in a blur, heels clicking on pavement, horns honking in the distance, a street musician playing jazz across the way. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. She didn't call anyone. She just stared at the screen, her reflection catching in the black surface. Not because she needed to see herself, but because she needed to remember who she was. Not just Victor Alden's wife, but a woman who had walked barefoot across villages in Cambodia to open schools, who had built water wells in Kenya, who had chosen a life of humility, not because she had to, but because she believed real power didn't need to scream. It whispered. The world spun on. People passed by without knowing what had just happened. Just another woman in a plain dress standing too close to a jewelry store. Just another invisible moment in a city obsessed with surfaces. But then, a soft hum split through the street. Heads turned. A few jaws dropped. The Rolls-Royce Phantom glided silently toward the curb, its midnight black finish gleaming like oil against sunlight. The chauffeur stepped out and opened the back door with reverence. Elena didn't turn to look. Not yet. But the reflection in her phone told her everything. It wasn't just any phantom, it was his. And inside, a man was already stepping out. Tall, calm, dangerous in that quiet way that came from building empires no one could see until it was too late. He moved with the kind of assurance that didn't need introduction, that made people forget their words, that made Monica's face, moments later, turn from triumph to ash. But for now, Elena stood outside. On that step, the pain still fresh in her chest, her dignity clutched tighter than her purse strap, as the store she'd just been ejected from prepared to learn the most expensive lesson of its life. The rear door of the Rolls-Royce opened with quiet precision, and Victor Alden stepped out into the early afternoon light. He wore a charcoal gray suit tailored so precisely it moved with him like a second skin, and the subtle sheen of his Italian leather shoes whispered wealth in a language that needed no translation. His salt and pepper hair was swept back with the same intentionality he brought to everything, from his billion-dollar negotiations to the way he folded napkins after meals. But in that moment, he wasn't the enigmatic CEO of Alden Tech, the man whose algorithms powered half the financial systems in North America. He was just a husband whose entire being stiffened at the sight of his wife standing alone on the boutique's front steps, her arms folded across her chest not in defense, but in silent restraint. Elena didn't speak immediately. She didn't rush toward him or dramatize her pain. She simply met his gaze and said, with a voice that barely trembled, "They kicked me out." Victor blinked once, then again. "What?" His tone was level, but his eyes darkened like storm clouds rolling in. "I told them my name," Elena continued, "and yours. I asked them to check the order. I even described the piece. They laughed, said I didn't look like I belonged here." She paused, eyes drifting toward the glass doors that had closed behind her. "They thought I was trying to steal." For a long beat, Victor said nothing. He didn't ask who. He didn't demand to know every word that had been said. He didn't need to. The slight twitch at his jawline said everything. He turned, slowly, deliberately, and walked up the stone steps without another word. The chauffeur closed the Rolls door with a reverent thump, and Elena followed a few paces behind, not out of obligation, but because she knew what was about to happen would not be loud. It would be precise, surgical. Inside, Monica was mid-laugh, recounting the scene to another staff member. She actually said her husband was Victor Alden. Can you imagine? Her laughter cut off mid-breath when the boutique door opened again. Her eyes scanned the man entering, and for a moment, she didn't register his face, only the energy he brought with him. Calm, icy, contained power. Victor's eyes swept the room once. He spotted Monica. "You?" he said quietly, voice as smooth as polished steel. "Are you the manager?" Monica straightened, nerves flickering under the surface. I'm the lead associate on duty," she replied, her tone instantly more formal. "Is there something I can assist you with, sir?" Victor didn't blink. "I need to speak to whoever just refused to serve my wife," Monica faltered. "Your wife?" Behind her, Sean, the younger clerk, froze. His eyes widened, realization dawning like a slow sunrise. Monica glanced at Elena, now standing silently behind Victor, and the color drained from her face. "Oh, I didn't realize." A woman in a burgundy pantsuit stepped forward from the side office. "Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice clipped with authority. Her name tag read Jillian Grant, store manager. "Yes," Victor said, without even turning to face her. "There is." He pulled a sleek black card holder from his pocket and handed her a platinum business card with only a name and a phone number etched on it. "Victor Alden," he said. The moment the name was spoken, the boutique's energy shifted. A hush fell across the showroom. One of the older clients, a woman dripping in pearls and old money, gasped and leaned toward her friend. "That's Victor Alden," she whispered, eyes wide. The Victor Alden. Sean dropped the tablet he'd been holding, the device clattering against the marble floor. Monica stood frozen in place. Jillian paled visibly and reached out to shake his hand, but Victor didn't offer one in return. He turned, instead, to the glass case nearest the counter, as if inspecting its contents. "This store," he said, voice low but cutting, "has handled over 7 figures in purchases from my wife and I over the last 6 years. Quietly, discreetly, without the need for red carpets or private jets. We've never made a scene, never asked for favors. My wife came here today to pick up a piece she helped design, a sapphire pendant. You didn't just deny her service, you humiliated her." Jillian's lips parted, a protest caught in her throat, but Victor continued. "She told you her name. You chose to ignore it. She asked you to check your system. You chose to call security." Monica opened her mouth, desperation creeping in now. "Mr. Alden, I wasn't aware." "You were very aware," Victor cut in. "You were aware of what she was wearing, of the bag she carried, of the shoes on her feet. That was all you needed to decide who she was, or wasn't." He stepped closer now, not with aggression, but with a gravity that made the air feel heavier. "And what you didn't know is that the person you treated like a criminal is the reason this store exists in its current location. My investment group approved the lease for Leora and Sons on the condition that it partnered with a community mentorship program my wife helped launch. She is why this boutique has a flagship location in Alden Plaza. Without her, you'd still be in Midtown, across from a parking garage." Monica's hand flew to her mouth. Sean stared at the floor, too ashamed to lift his head. The manager, Jillian, looked as if she'd just been slapped. The boutique doors opened again, this time more cautiously, and a man in a navy suit hurried in, out of breath. "Victor," he said, clearly startled. "I just got the call. What happened?" This was Charles Everly, regional director of Leora and Sons, and one of the few people in the luxury jewelry world who had Victor's personal number. He glanced from Elena to the silent staff, then to Monica, whose cheeks were the color of chalk. "Charles," Victor greeted without warmth, "do you allow your stores to profile and publicly humiliate your clients?" Charles blinked. "Of course not." "Then you have a problem." Victor turned to the room. "This isn't about a necklace. It's not even about us. It's about a culture you've let fester here, one that values status over substance, that decides someone's worth based on whether they walk in wearing Louboutin or loafers." His voice remained steady, not raised, but it commanded the entire room. "Today, my wife was told, in front of customers, staff, and security, that she didn't look like someone who could afford to be here. And that humiliation? That's on you." Charles looked visibly shaken. "Victor, I can't apologize enough." "Please, don't apologize to me," Victor interrupted. "Apologize to my wife. She came here quietly. She did everything right, and she was treated like a thief. Charles turned, stumbling over his words. Mrs. Alden, I am so deeply sorry for what you endured. I assure you this is not who we are. Elena looked at him, her expression unreadable. But it is, isn't it? She asked softly. At least, that's who you were until 10 minutes ago. Silence fell again, heavier this time. So what now? Jillian finally asked, voice barely audible. Victor turned to her. You're fired, he said simply. Effective immediately. Monica the same. Monica gasped, and Jillian looked as if the floor had disappeared beneath her. You can't. I can, Victor replied, and I have. Your team treated my wife like a liability. I'm treating you like the one you are. Charles didn't argue. He simply nodded, silently confirming the decision. The rest of you, Victor said, turning to the remaining staff, will be retrained. By my team. Starting tomorrow. He paused, then added, You're lucky my wife is more patient than I am. Otherwise, this store would be closed before sunset. He turned to Elena then, eyes softening for the first time since he walked in. Do you want the necklace? Elena smiled faintly. Not anymore. I'll design something new. Somewhere else. Victor nodded once, then offered her his arm. She took it. Together they walked out of the store in complete silence, leaving behind a room full of people who had just learned, in the most humiliating way possible, that the cost of judgment was more than they could afford. 3 days after the confrontation, Victor received an urgent call from the global CEO of Leora & Sons. Apologies were offered. Meetings requested. Contracts threatened with cancellation if the Aldens went public. The story had already begun to leak, though not from Victor or Elena. A blurry photo had surfaced online of a woman in a simple dress being escorted out of the flagship boutique, with a follow-up image of Victor Alden standing at the center of the store, like a statue made of fire and frost. The captions read like whispered gossip. Was that Victor Alden's wife? And Leora in trouble? But Victor and Elena remained silent. Not a single tweet. Not a press release. Not even a veiled comment from an anonymous source. And that silence terrified the brand more than any headline. Because everyone knew, when people like Victor Alden didn't say anything, it was only because they were deciding whether to destroy you completely or not at all. Victor wanted to walk away. Elena had told him that first night back home, sitting on their rooftop garden under a blanket of stars, that she didn't want a lawsuit. Not because they don't deserve it, she had said, but because it won't change what needs to change. He'd looked at her, quietly stunned by her grace. And in that moment, he realized what she truly wanted wasn't retribution. It was redemption. Not for herself, for them. For everyone who had been silently dismissed, overlooked, or insulted in stores like that one, for not dressing the part. Elena didn't want a check. She wanted change. So they made a proposal. One that the company had no choice but to accept. A full anti-bias initiative rolled out across all Leora & Sons boutiques worldwide. Training in dignity, empathy, and inclusive service practices, written and overseen by a team handpicked by Elena herself. A third-party audit of all hiring protocols. A revision of the brand's values and mission statement. And the cherry on top, a scholarship program for women from marginalized backgrounds to train in luxury retail and design, fully funded by the Alden Foundation, but branded under Leora's name. They'll think we're helping them save face, Victor said with a faint smile. Let them. It'll do more than that. 6 weeks later, the flagship store on Alden Plaza reopened, not with a glitzy launch party or red carpet event, but with quiet dignity. No celebrities, no champagne towers, just a single press release and a short statement printed on every display. We are listening. We are learning. A new plaque was installed behind the counter, this one etched not in stone but brushed gold. Dignity is the true luxury. And beneath it, Elena's words in smaller script. True service begins when judgment ends. Monica and Jillian were gone, of course. Their departure had made headlines in the industry, and whispers followed them wherever they applied next. But Elena didn't track them, didn't demand a public apology. She wasn't interested in their downfall. What mattered was what had risen in its place. Sean, the once hesitant young clerk, had been promoted to assistant manager. It was Elena's idea. He now oversaw the mentorship program in partnership with the Alden Foundation, guiding new hires through empathy-based training modules. On his lapel, he wore a tiny enamel pin, a dove carrying a gold thread, symbolizing restoration. The first customer to walk in that morning was an elderly woman wearing orthopedic shoes and a floral print dress that had faded to near translucence. Her purse was stitched at the corners, her hair uncombed. She asked to see the platinum engagement sets, and no one blinked. Sean welcomed her with warmth and dignity, offering her a seat and a glass of water, while another associate gently laid out 3 designs. No eye rolls, no patronizing smiles. Just service, the kind that once only came with a black card. Upstairs, Elena watched through the glass railing, her fingers gently gripping the balcony. She didn't speak, she just watched. It was working, one interaction at a time. Over the following weeks, similar stories surfaced. An immigrant mother buying a gold chain for her daughter's quinceañera served like royalty. A deaf couple offered ASL support and a quiet room for their ring selection. A single father bringing his son to pick out a gift for his late wife's birthday offered not just kindness but presence. Elena visited each boutique quietly, always dressed the same. Linen skirts, faded sweaters, simple sandals. Not once did she reveal who she was, and not once did she need to, because now they saw everyone. One crisp autumn afternoon, she returned to Alden Plaza. The air was golden, and the trees lining the promenade had turned the color of embers. She wasn't there for business, just a stroll. A bookstore stop, maybe coffee. As she passed the familiar storefront, she paused, not to go in, but to observe. The display window now featured portraits of clients, real ones, not models. People of every shape, age, and background, each holding a piece of jewelry and a small placard that said, "Seen, heard, valued." Elena smiled, not because it was perfect, but because it was better. She adjusted the strap of her bag and turned to continue walking, just as another Rolls-Royce glided up to the curb. The door opened, and a woman stepped out, probably late 30s. Curly hair, comfortable jeans, a flannel shirt, no makeup, no entourage. She hesitated near the store entrance, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. Elena saw it, the pause, the instinct to step back. But before she could retreat, the boutique's door swung open. Sean himself stood there smiling. "Welcome," he said with genuine warmth. "Is there anything I can help you find today?" The woman blinked in surprise, then smiled back and walked in. Elena didn't say a word. She just watched them disappear inside. Then she turned and walked on, her reflection catching in the glass window beside her, not as a billionaire's wife or the hidden benefactor of a global luxury chain, but as a woman who had refused to be small. A woman who turned insult into instruction, humiliation into healing, judgment into justice, and somehow through all of it never raised her voice, because she didn't need to. Her presence was enough. Her story had already been written, not in diamonds or gold, but in the changed hearts of those who now served, not with pride, but with humility. And for the first time in a long time, Elena Alden allowed herself the smallest, most satisfying smile, not of triumph, but of peace.